In the hospital room sat a troubled man. His whole body was covered with many abrasions and bruises. Doctors had literally pulled him from the afterlife after a suicide attempt a few days before. His empty and lifeless eyes looked as if into a void. The smile on the suspect's face was so sincere that it made the experienced operatives feel a sense of fear. They looked at the man with amazement and scrolled in their heads the events that had happened recently. Less than 6 months had passed since the beginning of the events. Then, John had lost a considerable sum at the casino. His wife Mary had been crying and throwing dishes at her husband for a long time, though she knew deep down that it was no use and that at the first opportunity, he would become a hostage to his addiction again. The girl quickly stopped the hysteria because she feared scaring the children. She silently sat down at the computer and began to post ads for the apartment sale. John has fired long ago, and Mary's annual salary would not be enough to pay half the debt. Little Dean and Robbie sat in the next room and cried. They were terrified of the future unknown and understood everything. Father and mother fought quite often, blaming each other for all the troubles. The constant lack of money and the father's gambling addiction left the children without a childhood. That's why they knew nothing good could be expected at the ages of 10 and 12. 2 weeks later, the apartment was already sold. A large apartment in an upscale neighborhood could cover the debt. A small amount was even left over. At this point, Mary was thanking her late parents, from whom she had inherited it, but her heart was bursting with grief and resentment. The girl was much stronger than she seemed. She told her children with a smile that she had already managed to find a wonderful country house, which was located near the lake. With admiration, she described the surrounding nature, green forests, and a beautiful body of water. The mother promised the children their own treehouse, many new friends, and much more. John, in silence, packed his things. He was well aware that they had no choice. The young man was not feeling guilty. He was comfortable covering up his addiction to slot machines. At every quarrel, he did nothing but pity and pretend to be a victim who was supposedly trying to escape a bottomless pit. Encouraged by his mother's story, the children ran headlong to the car, trying to take a window seat as if someone was trying to move it to the center of the heart. The parents were again pretending to be a happy family, promising a carefree future, telling us that everything had worked out just fine, even though they weren't even standing next to each other at every stop. 3 hours later, their new home was already visible in the distance. Everyone was eager to unpack their belongings, take the best room, look at the neighboring buildings, and bathe in the shiny water surface. But as the car pulled up to the structure, reality hit the forehead. The promised posh house turned out to be a flabby but rather sturdy building, and the children could already see the glow of new arguments in their mother's eyes that everything was not so wrong. Everything was just fine. They understood how hard it was for her, and Dad, in turn, had already begun to give the children assignments. Dean, from tomorrow we'll start fixing up the house. First we'll sand it, then paint it, and Robbie has to fix the front garden. Everyone in the car smiled and pretended to be happy, even though their hearts were scratching at them. The children ran into the house and went straight to the second floor to get their room. John brought their bags, and Mary handed them a basin with a damp rag. No explanation was needed. My brother and sister excitedly began dusting the room and laying out their things. 2 hours later, they came downstairs and were surprised to find the whole house shining and as clean as possible. The father promptly took out trash bags, and the mother began heating dinner. The mouth-watering smell of mashed potatoes with sausage and corn tortillas spread throughout the rooms. After a snack, the family decided to scatter to their rooms and go to sleep to relieve the fatigue of the day. The children got settled in their separate rooms, and the parents chose the bedroom on the first floor. During the night, John was awakened by headaches and a feeling of suffocation. He was surprised that the rest of the family slept peacefully in their beds. Coming to the kitchen, the man decided to drink some orange juice, but he felt a sharp chill and goosebumps like 1,000 ants were running down his back, causing an unpleasant tingling sensation. Fortunately, the fireplace located downstairs was already filled with wood. John had only to heat it, and after seeing the first flames, the protagonist lay down on the couch and fell asleep. In his dream, he saw a terrible picture, the bloodied and mutilated bodies of his children and wife. The man turned to the mirror and saw himself in reflection. Blood streamed from his hands, and the metal knife was unwilling to stop as if it wanted new victims. Then the man approached the mirror and, with a beastly smile, full of genuine joy and madness, whispered, "Kill them," and then sharply plunged the knife into his chest. The father of the family burst out of bed in a cold sweat and ran to the mirror. He looked at himself, trying to find even a drop of blood. In his head, monotonically repeated only one thought, "No, no," but the echo of the night kept repeating, "Kill them." Seeing the terrified children and Mary, the man cried genuine tears. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he ran up to them and hugged them with a strength that would have made him envy a hydraulic press. "Honey, are you all right?" Mary asked, trying to unhook his hands, which were white with tension. "Of course," he replied. "I love you so much." Within a few minutes, the whole family was eating breakfast, trying to put the morning's incident behind them. After snacking on a couple of cocoa sandwiches, the kids decided to leave their parents alone and ran to the lake. Mary looked at her husband with a certain sense of surprise. In the back of her mind, she was still waiting for an explanation of his morning concert, having realized that John said that he had been having a nightmare. "Just a dream that I hit a dog," he said uncertainly, the first thing that came into his head. The woman gave her husband hot cinnamon coffee, and for the first time in a long time, she sincerely hugged him and said, "Honey, maybe now we can be delighted. Maybe it's time when we do not have to lie to our children constantly, promising them a carefree future." The man smiled and said, "We'll do our best." Mary was immersed in an abyss of obligations, cleaning the house, completing daily work reports, calling clients, etc. The only things that made her happy about the situation were the remote job that allowed her to keep her earnings while moving and the house's condition. It certainly didn't look like a fancy house, but it had a sound sewer system and the lack of rodents. Crumbling plaster and torn wallpaper also made the new owners happy. John, as promised, began to work with Dean on the house's reconstruction. They peeled off the old coat of paint and decided to help Robbie, who had already improved a few rose bushes, which actively clung to the walls of the building with their branches. Another night came, and the family's father went to his wife's bedroom after checking that the children were already asleep. After this morning's incident, it was as if something had changed. She had become a caring and loving wife again. After hugging John, the couple fell into a sleep that was quite restless for the man. He awoke again to a sense of imminent tragedy. Going downstairs, the protagonist decided to rekindle the fireplace and sink back into sleep. "Kill them! Kill them!" haunted him again after his tumultuous awakening. This time the father of the family tried to behave more restrained. Depicting some semblance of a smile, he walked over to the children, who were watching a series on the laptop, kissed them, and then went to the lake. Mary caught him on the dock and invited him into the house, to which she received a rather rude reply. "I'm not hungry." The girl decided not to interrogate and returned to her new daily duties. The family's father chose not to pay attention to the nightmares and continued the business he had started with Dean and Robbie. The new day flew by even faster than the day before, and the family went to their rooms as usual after dinner. A sense of unease haunted John as he settled in front of the fireplace warming him, immersed in his thoughts. "Kill them! Kill them!" Like drumsticks, these words pounded on his head, louder and louder each time. The man did manage to fall asleep, but rivers of blood flowed again in his sleep. "Kill them! Kill them!" sounding like thunderclaps in his head. When he woke up, he grabbed his head and began to sway, trying to get rid of the words, but they were too deep, as if a worm in his ear had gnawed away at his brain and controlled him. John couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed a knife and ran into the bedroom. Mary was peacefully sleeping there. Looking at her with crazy eyes, the man stabbed her several times in the face and slit her throat. Without thinking twice, he ran to Dean and slit his throat brutally, as if it were not his son, but a purchased chicken carcass. Robbie was the only one left, the little girl asleep in her bed, unaware that her days were numbered. Her father leaned the cold steel against her throat and pressed the knife. Having finished his business, the man went down to the fireplace. Settling by its warming fire, he began to laugh, but suddenly his gaze shifted to the mirror. It wasn't him. It was that troubled villain from his dream. John walked over to the mirror and began to examine this stranger. His eyes filled with tears, and a wide, joyful smile evoked a sense of dread. Suddenly, in the reflection, he saw the same knife that had taken so many innocent souls. Then the protagonist took one last look at the thought and drove the knife right into his heart. It would seem to be the end of the story, but no. As it happens in silly movies, the neighbor who came to bring the new press saw a horrifying picture. The breathless body of the head of the family laying in the living room. Finding the bodies of their remaining family members, the woman called 911. Doctors managed to save John. The knife blade had not touched his heart. It only grazed a lung. Everyone was anxious to hear the story of what had happened and to punish the ruthless killer. The sheriff promised to find the culprit at any cost. But John looked at him and grinned that same crazy smile. He whispered, "It was home. It was home. He says it was home." His whispering was followed by crazy laughter, chilling the heart of everyone present. The former head of the family spent the rest of his days in a psychiatric hospital. For the rest of his life, he repeated only one phrase. This is home. He says this is home.